SQL is a great language for extracting data and aggregating it, and basically scanning large amounts of data when you tell with SQL in a more like declarative way what you need to get. However, there are times when what you need to get is simple to say, but complex to say in the SQL language. For example, if you need to transpose a table or to pivot the resulting data, which usually you need to do while you're creating a report. Then there are some SQL dialects that would allow you to do that very easily, for example, using the pivot keyword. However, if your database does not support the pivot keyword and other keywords which would assist you, then it just becomes more complex and tricky until you get how to do it. And then it becomes more simpler because you get the trick behind it. Let's say you have made your select set statement and even group by some data. However, now you need to have the report. For example, in Excel, you can create a pivot table. And then if you drag, let's say, if you have a column of weeks for each row, which tells which week or which month this data is from, and you want the weeks and the month, basically the aggregation, to be on the columns. So you want, let's say, column 1 to be week 1, column 2, week 2, column 3, week 3, and so forth. However, as you extracted the data, you don't have these columns. How would you have these columns at all? You don't have inside the data anything that matches week 1, week 2, week 3. So when you do the group by, you did first group by week. However, when you do group by week, then the weeks are now grouped and you have row 1, week 1, row 2, week 2, and row 3, week 3, and so on, because you made the group by weeks. But now you want the weeks to be on the columns because you want each of the data. Let's say you want to have the revenue on row 1, and then you want to have the average salary on row 2, and then you have the average salary by department on row 3, and you want to compare them. So you want the columns to be of the columns week 1, week 2, week 3. So how do you do this transposition in between the rows and the columns, or pivoting? Because if you have Excel, then it's very simple. You drag the different rows and columns into the pivot table. You have in the pivot table in Excel, you have a section named columns. So each header that you drag to there is now becoming a column. So this is just great. But in SQL, how do you do this? So there are a few stages, and actually I made some research on it all over the internet, how people suggest to have it. And I must say that the website Modern SQL did an amazing job on explaining it, where no one in YouTube, in whatever, made a good job in explaining this. Only the website Modern SQL did a terrific job for explaining it. So the tools in order to do this transposition in SQL are a few. We need to use the union keyword in order to unify different results. And we need to use the case statement, case when, or filter if exists. If you don't have the filter, then you just use the case keyword. And we need to remove some group bys, because if you already had a group by week, then this means you have multiple rows and each row denotes a week. So in step number 1, we are going to remove the weeks from the rows. And how do we do this? We go to the SQL statement and remove the weeks from the rows. Now, we just remove the go by week. So if you had go by year or the dates, then this is enough. But if you want the weeks to appear on the top as the columns, then you remove the go by week from the row. So now that we have removed it, we want basically to be left with one row that would not include the go by week. The next step is to create the different columns. So we didn't have these columns of week 1, week 2, week 3. We want to create it out of the data, and for that we use the select case. So you do select case when extract week from the data is week number 1, then take the revenue value, and this would be a column named week 1. And then you want to do select case when week is 2, then take the data. Okay, so basically you get the idea. What we did is in step 1, we removed the group by week. Once we removed it, we are now ready to construct a new SQL which would have the columns as the rows. And in order to move rows to columns, we use the case statement in SQL. Step 1, remove the grouping for the columns that we want. So if we had group by week, we remove it because we want the weeks to appear in the columns, not in the rows. If you have group by week, you would have rows as weeks. So you remove this group by. And then you need to add new columns for each week. In order to add a new column for each week, you use the case statement. Because with the case, you can then do a filter, choose which value to get, and then give the column a name. So the case allows you to build new columns. So we removed rows, and we are building new columns with the case statement. And now that we have removed rows, and we have built new columns with the grouping that we wanted with the select statements, now we want the different values on different rows. For example, we want the revenue and the max salary and the number of employees. We want all these to appear in different rows. And how do we do this? Now that we need different rows, we use different select statements and unify them with unify all. So the 3 steps are this, to repeat on how to transpose an SQL result. First, remove the grouping for the row keys that you want to move to the columns, because if you won't remove this group by, then these group by row keys would appear as rows, but you wanted them as columns. So now that we have removed them from the rows, in step 2, we want to add them as columns. In order to add new columns into the result of SQL, we used the case statement, which allows us to add new columns. And now, in step 3, we have removed the rows of the grouping, we have added new columns, but now we want new rows for each data point. For example, you want new row for salary for all of the weeks in the columns, and you want a row for the employees for all of the weeks. And how do you do this? You do multiple select statements and you unify them all with unify all. So the 3 steps were: first, remove the grouping from the rows. Second step, use the case statement to add new columns. And third step, use the unify command, unify SQL command, in order to create multiple rows. So we have manually removed rows, added columns, and then added the new rows. It's like doing the whole thing manually. And for each such step, removing rows. Step 2, add columns. Step 3, add rows. We use different SQL variants. We remove grouping, we add columns with case, and then we use the unify all to add new rows. So this was how to transpose or how to pivot data as a result of SQL without using the keyword pivot because it does not exist in all the databases. Usually this is done in reporting context because in reporting context you need to group things by weeks in columns and you want to view the change week over week or month over month, and these are the cases where you need to do this transposition. So I hope this was interesting and see you next time.